So we're going to start out with redesign. And once again, we've made the mistake of allowing Todd to go first. So let's see how this goes. Todd Clint, you're up. Tell us about the redesign philosophy. So we should get going. We are March 20th, 2024, and most of our Sympraxians are here. Everyone but Mark, I believe. He had a personal thing to deal with today, so he won't be joining us. Today's topic is a continuation from last topic, which was 2 weeks ago, in which I was not there, but doesn't matter. I'm sure the team held up their end of the bargain quite well.
We're going to be swimmingly. Great job.
Swimmingly, great job. Okay, good. We did swimmingly. So we're going to continue the discussion about migration, and we're going to go a little deeper today and talk about, quote unquote, the Sympraxis approach. And so what we'll be talking about is our better practice. It doesn't mean it's the only one, but in our opinions, this is the one that works the best, which is redesign. We're going to talk about planning, some of the speed bumps you can run into. We'll rediscuss collaboration versus communication in the context of this conversation. We'll talk about building the roadmap. We'll talk about execution. And we'll talk about go live and sort of communications and what that all has to do. So we're going to start out with redesign. And once again, we've made the mistake of allowing Todd to go first. So let's see how this goes. Todd Clint, you're up. Tell us about the redesign philosophy.
Yeah, so last week we talked about what a terrible idea lift and shift was. Even though I had this great AI-generated image that Derek threw out, and I haven't spoken to him since. It's been a real contentious thing. But the big benefit of the redesign is you get to atone for the sins of the past. And sometimes they're really not even sins, but as we work with any product, SharePoint, whatever, longer, we learn more, we do things better. I know more now than I did 5 years ago and 10 years ago. And so this gets us a chance to revisit things and do better in what we do. So implement better practices that are out there. Also, the platform changes. That's kind of why we upgrade in the first place. And so there might have been a kludgy way to do something in the past that now there's an out of the box way, or maybe the product removed support for stuff like subwebs, and you got a lot of those, so you got to redesign things like that. And also just keeping an idea on technical debt. You don't want to leave future Todd or future Derek or future Julie with more things to mess with. So the redesign gives you a chance to look at things and say, we're going to fix this. One thing I didn't put on this slide is when you do the redesign, one of my number one tenet for migrations, upgrades, whatever, is don't migrate crap. And this is where during the redesign, the crap, you find it, and that crap can be content, that crap can be custom code, that can be whatever. You're just like, yeah, let's leave this right here. And the redesign helps you to find some of that thing. And another good pro for this is you get to bring in the business users. So you can't do these redesigns without talking to the business users and finding out how they use the product and what their business flow is. It's been my experience in 20 some years of SharePoint consultancy that SharePoint admins and SharePoint consultants are terrible SharePoint users. We just don't have a good idea how the product is used by normal folks. So getting them in helps us do a better job setting that up. Now, there are a few cons to doing the redesign. One of the cons is you got to talk to those business users and people in the field, and boy, do they make some unreasonable demands. So you gotta watch out for that. That knife cuts both ways. But in reality, the big con is it's more work, because you got to have these meetings, you got to get people brought in and moving things around. And then once you start slicing and dicing things and deleting things and adding content types where there aren't content types, that kind of stuff, then you got to do testing, and that just takes a lot more time. But yeah, so I think that's the pros and cons of redesigning.
In the end, though, I think it's probably almost always worth it. We talk about the moving scenario where often, you move houses and you want to empty and clean out the basement, not to necessarily take everything with you that you've had in the previous house, just to keep the clutter down and just keep your life organized. I think it helps helps everyone's mental health. All right, so let's talk about
jump in. Krista and Casper bring up some other things. Krista mentions that most people don't like to do the work, the business users. They've got a job to do. Nobody likes to say you can delete all this. And Casper's like, yeah, they don't take the time. So there is some finessing. You need to have some rapport with these folks to make that happen.
Well, it's the carrot and the stick, I think.
Yeah.
You have to sort of get everybody on board with why this is so important and why it can help your organization be more productive in the end and help them be more productive in the end. All right, so shifting over to Derek.
I think so. Part of the concept of the redesign is understanding, as Todd said, the platform changes, and especially if you're on a SharePoint 2010 or 2013 intranet right now. Back in those days, the better practice was to build things in a pyramid, right? You had your homepage, and then you had the department subsite, and then you had a different subsite for every department like HR and IT. And then even underneath those subsites, often we popped team sites in there as well to sort of help, facilitate that ease of navigation. We built things around org structure. Mm-hmm. Today, we fundamentally shifted how we use SharePoint. So instead of building in that pyramid, we're building in a more flat site topology. And Patrick's going to get into this in a little bit, but we're also splitting apart that communication level with the team collaboration content. And so, the tool itself has changed. Our thinking needs to change with it. And that's part of what we can do with the migration, where we're redesigning things.
Yeah, and Krista brings up not missing inherited permissions. And that is probably the most fundamentally important piece of the change in the hierarchy. And as much as you may have liked that, when you start breaking inheritance, that can go wrong very quickly, in that you accidentally give people or remove permissions from things that people need access to. It's a very complicated sort of process to maintain that security structure, especially if you start getting fragmented about it. If you're like, oh, this library is only these 5 people and this one's these 10, but this one's this 3 from that group and 4 from that group, and it gets really tricky fast. And then, as Todd could tell you, in the on-prem days, when you start really getting down to permission levels, the speed with which your environment would run would take a massive hit, the more permission structures that you broke the inheritance on. And that just wasn't sustainable, and it certainly wasn't sustainable for a SaaS product. So I think this move was sort of fundamental from them for Microsoft trying to make the SaaS product as fast as possible, but it also just works better as far as like, take your site and make that your security construct as much as you possibly can. And that makes a heck of a lot more sense, makes it easier to maintain, makes it easier to make sure people put things in the right place. I mean, you still can break it, but it's not as hard. And then to give us back that pyramid or that hierarchy, we ended up with hub sites and the association with hubs and such to give us that same feel.
And that also eliminates the whole concept of moving stuff around when departments reorg, right?
Yeah.
So when finance is under this group and it gets moved to that group, or IT gets moved over here or there, or IT splits into 2 or 3 different groups, this flat topology really lets us take that and fine tune it and bring it together without actually doing another in-place migration, which is what we had to do with SharePoint 2010.
Yeah. No, that's a really excellent point too.
Yeah.
All right.
So
let's move forward to planning.
So, we are huge fans at Sympraxis of making a plan, right? You need to know what you're going to do before you start to do it. And some of the things that are really important to that planning process are the steering committee and governance. Understanding who the stakeholders are, who's going to be driving this ship. You can hire a consultant to come in and actually turn the switches, do the knobs, do the interviews. But at the end of the day, this is your product. and this is your tool, and you need to own it, and you need people that are going to help you steer that ship. So generally, we like to have a broad steering committee, and maybe there's like a core team where it's, the product owner, the IT owner, and your consultants. But then you've got a broader team that includes executive level buy-in, or business champions, folks like corporate communications and HR, heavy users of the system.
Yeah.
And that helps you in the long run, because the core team can make decisions around governance and say, this is the way we're going to do things. But inevitably, that one department with that really loud person says, oh, but I want this on the homepage. And you can go back to your steering committee with that executive level buy-in. And if they're supporting you in proper ways, then they can help sort of enforce your governance.
Yeah.
And speaking of governance, understanding what you do and don't want to turn on in the platform, how you're going to construct things, making very specific strategic decisions around custom code or around Power Platform usage, or all of those things are the kinds of things that you want to think about before you start your migration, because they will pop up.
Yeah.
And the other part is that, governance and steering committees, these are living, breathing documents or sort of thoughts. Is you can change your mind, and it can evolve over time. It has to, because the platform is going to evolve.
Yep.
And lastly, before we start, we always start by running a content inventory. And I use this as a really, really broad term, because when we go about doing our initial planning phases, we look at everything, right? We look at how much content, how many sites do you have? Do you have workflows? Do you have 2010 or 2013 workflows? Is there any custom code out there? And sort of doing an assessment of the corpus of content, whatever content means. And then you can make solid decisions based on that content around what you want to do, how you want to tackle it, the order in which you want to tackle it.
Those are great points, and it's a good segue into speed bumps, and I think you covered a few of these. So this is more, I think, for those migrating from the on-prem classic product to SharePoint Online, modern. Some of these things just aren't the same as they were before. So branding is a big one. If you had custom branding in your on-prem SharePoint intranet that was pixel perfect and completely didn't look like SharePoint, which was the thing we got asked for all the darn time, you're out of luck, essentially. There is no concept of branding in that deep a level. You can definitely have themes. You can have iconography that is sort of similar, so that it sets a tone for your intranet. And to be quite frank, I think compared to the old days, SharePoint Online, once you actually apply some of those multiple themes and iconography, looks really nice. And I don't think the branding is as important as it used to be. But if you're used to having all that custom branding, you're in for a bit of a shock there. Custom solutions, there's a lot here. So custom solutions used to be, most often were farm level solutions that were written in C# and custom code and deployed into your servers. And that kind of solution is not supported in the same architectural way in a SaaS product. You can sort of reimagine the architecture and implement those solutions, but it takes a significant amount of rework. If you were one of the people who did custom solutions using JavaScript and use script editor or content editor web parts, there is actually a way forward for you, but it requires putting those things into SharePoint framework or other ways to surface client-side scripting into your solution. SharePoint framework is the primary one that's hosted. Teams apps are another where you're self-hosted. Third-party solutions, a lot of them don't have a version that works on the SaaS product, so that's a thing. InfoPath forms were deprecated. If you still have them, you are going to want to look for either a Power Platform way or a custom SharePoint Framework form way to move forward. And similar with workflows, if you had 2010 or 2013 workflows, they're deprecated and turned off to a certain extent. And so you're going to need to look at a Power Platform way or custom code via Azure or some other sort of instance way to move forward. Okay. So now that we've talked about all the speed bumps, Patrick, you're going to sort of go over this divide that we now have versus when we talk about collaboration versus communication. Patrick?
I don't even see his picture up there. Is he?
Oh, he was here.
Derek.
Oh, there he is.
All right. So I guess. Oh, there you go.
I'm muted. Okay. So just to recap, we talked about this a little bit last week, but just to expand a little bit more on the flat site topography that Derek was talking about. One of the things we try to do when we're going through these content inventories, more so once we start getting into the meetings with the departments and the business units, as opposed to the higher up kind of executive level, is to discuss what the content is and where the best place is for it to live. So what we mean by that is the collaboration, is the work that you have out there, the content that's out there, department related, where it's one, maybe two departments are working together to complete forms, or is it where you have your procedures that are for your department only, that all those tricky permissions that we've set up, only certain people can see it. We would take that information and move it to a team site. That allows us to streamline the intranet and the communication site, which is really where information that the entire organization needs to know lives. Speaking of that governance, it also makes it much easier when people ask for things on their communication site. When you have that steering committee and you have that support, you can push back and say, nope, unfortunately, we're moving that to your SharePoint team site, because that's where we can have more limits on the permissions. The communication site is for everybody.
Yes, absolutely agree with that. Casper mentioned the STS #3 versus a team site in the chat, and so the STS3 is the classic team site, and then the newer, more modern team site is the ones that have some of the more modern features. So they're very, very similar templates, but under the covers, it is a different template ID. So I should point that out.
And I would just add to that, Julie, that I would go with the modern team site, but it's also a question of whether or not your organization is teams forward. And if you're more teams forward, those team sites may end up being Microsoft Teams
enabled.
Does it Teams enabled? Yeah, Teams enabled sites, or whatever we want to call it. But they're a team in Teams, so that way your users can take advantage of things like chat and app mentioning and all of that stuff, or they could use a SharePoint site, keeping in mind that there's also a SharePoint site behind every Microsoft team. So, it really depends on how your organization works.
I think it's better, even if your organization isn't using Teams today, I think it's better to use the modern team site. Don't Teams enable it if you don't want to, but that gives you the option in the future. If you don't do that, you then have to migrate all your content out of that STS #3 site into you know what I'm saying? So
I think groupify it. Can't you groupify that SharePoint site? And
I don't think you can I don't think you can with the classic ones. Can you? Oh, Casper's nodding. You can with the classic ones.
Can you groupify? All right, Casper, tell us.
He's trying to find his mute button.
Casper.
I did that once. I actually took all the classic sites and moved them up, groupified them, and turned them into teams. And eventually, the only catch really was that they are still the old model if you look in your admin center. And
Yeah.
another one was that the sharing setting, whether it allowed external or not, that was actually reset during the when I groupified them.
Yeah.
And the documentation said it wasn't the case. It was the case, and now the documentation say it is something that you have to look out for, because
Yeah.
I had to
I
contact
wonder
them
how long they're
because-
even going to allow that, to be quite
Yeah.
frank. It's just not something I would do. I just don't think there's any benefit today to creating a classic team site.
The only
Agreed.
reason is that they really love the idea that you have a visitor group and that you can assign people to the visitor group without any hustle, and that's.
Then I make the argument,
That's-
back to what Patrick was saying, that maybe the content that you are trying to share with a visitor from your team site belongs on your communication site, or a version of a communication site. If it's not specifically, like if we're talking about IT or HR, maybe you need a case specific communication site to share that content with visitors, where you want them to have read access, and you keep the team sites specific to collaboration work. I would make that argument.
I guess the main reason is just habit. That's what they were used to.
Right.
So and habit is a strong force. Don't
Yes.
underestimate that.
Yes.
So
All right.
the
Oops, sorry,
last
go
thing I
ahead.
wanted to say, no, I just want to say the last thing I wanted to say about that was that depending on your governance and your plan, it is also a good opportunity to get the buy-in from the departments, because while most of your communication sites are going to have a consistent look and feel, your team site is where you can customize it a little bit more, in the sense of your layout can look different than your communication page and things like that. You can choose a different theme if you want to, if that's what your organization is allowing for those. So it is one of those ways to allow people to keep that individuality and that department look and feel, post things that they want to do without disrupting that governance that we've set up for the communication sites.
That's a really good point. It allows you to have your team to have personality, sort of where at a communication site you have to be a little bit more formal. So that's another really good point about that. Okay, building the roadmap, Patrick.
Yes, so this is one of those slides that we could probably do an entire session on, but I will try to get through quickly. Some of the ways that we get to the roadmap and to begin the migration progress are things like user interviews and user stories. Specifically, some organizations decide to do some pre-work in terms of user interviews, where we'll go out and ask different people in department a series of questions that the steering committee has kind of come up with. Can you find the work from home policy? And people will actually go to the site and see if they can locate it. And you try to figure out how the navigation works for you, if people are using search more than anything else, and just try to get a better understanding of what is working on the current site versus where things can help grow and change. This helps us develop a better information architecture at the enterprise level, which we can then bring down as we start talking to the departments, which is where we start to get a little bit more detail with the user stories. Now, user stories are really what we ask each of the departments. I know I do when I have a meeting in a kickoff, where the real question is who's coming to your site and why are they coming to your site? It really helps us get to the nitty-gritty of making more efficient websites and communication sites by helping drive users to the content that they're looking for faster. So user stories are a great tool to try to figure out what that material is and how we can better architect that on the sites. I had another thought there. That's gone. But that all helps us build the navigation functionality on the site and the page. Certainly with my experience bringing in usability to it as well. So thinking about how people use the site, how people read web pages now, really getting away from paragraphs of text and trying to bullet out some of that content. So it's really kind of front and center. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention is the nice thing with the Modern is the ability to track what you're seeing on the site. So if you have a section for like most used links, you can monitor that on the 30, 60, 90-day schedule and see if those are still the case. So every 60 days, you can rotate those out if you find that people are visiting one page more than what you thought they were. So it helps keep the content current.
Isn't it also like the case where you can sort of use navigation plus the things on the page, especially maybe the home page of the site, to sort of drive engagement, right? So like maybe it using the one that we use a lot, which is like human resources open enrollment, right? You have open enrollment, you might want to have sort of, you know, maybe it's a news item, but maybe it's a little section that's like, you know, open enrollment now, click link button, whatever it is, but previously like benefits and or open enrollment might also be in the navigation, you know what I mean? And so you keep it in both places. And so you can sort of, if the navigation is encompasses all the things you can navigate to, the sort of ability to surface things and raise them higher up to get people to engage with them, depending on what your goals are at that given time, might be a really useful way. And so figuring those things out, I think, is part of that too.
And that's really thinking about, you know, the way we lay out the page and the usability, where, you know, the old school term of above the fold of the newspaper, you know, that key information that is kind of dynamic and changing and keeps people interested is at the top of the page. Whereas as you go down the page, it gets a little less specific, a little bit more broad, where you're really driving people into content further into the site. But certainly the call to action button is one I use exactly for what you're talking about, Julie. So your page looks the same, but then all of a sudden this little section of picture appears so people know that there's something going on specifically for like open enrollment.
Yeah, exactly.
Making use of the ad space, as they say.
Right. We're just answering some questions in the chat. Krista had asked if there was any recommendation for third-party analytics tools, and Derek and I are both saying, you know, he's done Google Analytics. I tend to lean towards Azure Analytics because I don't like the idea of sending my analytic data about stuff in the Microsoft 365 cloud to the Google Cloud. That just doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but we have clients who ask for Google Analytics and you can't talk them out of it. So we've sort of done both. Another question that is there is, where can we view those analytics? That, correct me if I'm wrong, it's site contents, right? You go to the site contents?
Yep, site contents, I don't know. It's in the site it's like right up there in the
right
site.
up in the top,
at the top of the page. Yeah, so you can do it both at a site level and a page level.
Oh, okay, great. So you can get page analytics on the page itself, and then site contents has analytics, and that's for the site or where you can get to the site. Okay, cool. All right, so moving forward to the next slide.
Quick timeline here. Our typical modernization approach for each site. We have kind of multiple steps that we talk about with both the business users and the site owners. Some of it is, you can see we color code it, so you can see what we do with site owners from the kickoff meeting, the reviewing the content inventory, the site review after Sympraxis has built it, creation of new content, and kind of break it out. This really helps that buy-in for those people who are sitting there saying, I don't have time for this. You can say, yes, it's a 4 to 6 week process, but we only need this much of your time.
Right, right. And it's sort of that interactive, making sure you get it the way they need it to be, but they've got to be able to maintain it at the end.
Correct.
And so that's definitely part of the executing the migration sort of thing. So Todd, did you want to try to address content inventory mapping?
Yeah, there's a few things that you can do. with this is one of those things, and it's too bad Anderson's not here because he's big on doing this. Whenever you're doing a migration and you're rejiggering things around, especially if you're doing ones from file shares, mapping where things go, and then we've got these long files and long folders, and what a lot of places don't realize is that they've got metadata, but it's all wedged into their file names and folder names and things like that. So trying to figure out what people do with their files and how they use them, what workflows they work through, because they, the state of that workflow is hidden in there too, final to approved, all that. And so figuring out how to do that the SharePoint way and mapping that is a good way to do it. I use PowerShell for a lot of this stuff, and we can't get into that because we're over time, but that is always a huge win once you can get content types and metadata and extract it out of those file names is always good.
Patrick, quickly, did you have anything to add? I mean, scheduling stuff, user acceptance testing, that's all part of that sort of cycle of mapping, training up the site owners as well. Anything else you want to add before we move on?
No, I mean, certainly there's a lot more that can be said about it, but we are at time, so
yeah.
Those are all important things to keep in mind and to plan for as you're going through the process. Certainly, the overall schedule and then user testing to make sure things are working how people want it to be used.
So then it all lands on go live, and so quickly, just want to talk about definitely doing some incremental update planning. So as we are doing these migrations, we're deploying content and moving content to test it to make sure it's what the users want. So we have to sort of plan for the final move, the incremental final update for all the content that was moved while we're developing things. Communication with your users, huge. I've seen this fail. This makes your intranet not go well. It means you don't have adoption. If you are not communicating with your users, keeping them up to date about what the plan is, when it's going to happen, how it's going to affect them, what kind of training that you can offer them so that they can understand the new intranet, that is key. There's going to then be go live tasks. You need to have a running list of all the things you're going to do on go live day, and supporting your users. And then finally, this is just the beginning. We talked about the steering committee at the very beginning. That steering committee is a body that needs to live on past the go live date. Your intranet is not a static thing. You don't just throw it out there, do it once and you're done. It's a living, breathing thing, and you need to monitor it and enhance it as we go forward. We've got some resources here. One of the things from Sue Hanley about governance is really, really useful. A lot of other usability testing. Our next episode is April 3rd. We're going to talk about the Microsoft 365 site life cycle. So definitely tune in for that one. It should be an interesting conversation. See us live all these different places with all these different discount codes. And thank you. Sorry, we went a little bit over, but thank you for joining us on today's Ask Sympraxis, and we look forward to seeing you the next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Sympraxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.